Okay, so we are going to start our new novel today with James Joyce's Dubliners. So it's important for you to know Joyce, we include him in British literature because he's generally a part of the modernist movement and from that part of the world. But Joyce is an Irish writer, and all of his fiction is really centered on Irish culture. And of course, and specifically in this book, Dublin. Joyce believed that Dublin was a symbol for all humanity. So while we're not all turn of the century Irish Dubliners, we can connect with the people of this book. They represent sort of a wide range of all types of people anywhere. Joyce was highly critical of Ireland and Irish culture, even though he lives in it in his fiction. The fiction exists as a social critique for the problems of his country and problems that we can relate to everywhere. Okay, so this is a map of Joyce's Dublin, and I wanted to just point out to you here that Dublin is basically a circle. So that's really important for James Joyce here, so you can see the circle, because circles are extremely prevalent in this book. Characters repeat themselves, characters walk in circles. Sometimes characters are actually walking around Dublin in this big, large circle of the city. So, what Joyce criticizes most of all is repetition without thought, when people do things without feeling or passion. And the circle is a motif that appears in all of the chapters of Dubliners, and it's really a symbol there to highlight this problem of just repetition without thinking, without passion, and without love. Okay, so these are quotes from James Joyce about Dubliners. I believe that in composing my chapter of moral history in exactly the way I have composed it, I have taken the first step towards the spiritual liberation of my country. So that quote to me says what Joyce was after was not just to criticize mercilessly the people that he knew and from his own country, but to actually cause people to break out of that circle of repetition, to break free from deadening repetitive existence and be spiritually liberated, to live with passion and spontaneity. Okay, and then this is a line from the end of Dubliners, from one of the last stories here. Better pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age. So most of the characters in Dubliners, one way or another, fail to take a risk, a very important risk. And in failing to do so, they remain quote unquote safe, but they more wither dismally with age instead of a passionate, albeit sometimes shorter existence. They choose to live a life that doesn't have much worth living in it. Okay, so the structure of Dubliners, we're going to vary from this a little bit. You guys have the full text, of course, online on Google Classroom, but you're also going to have a book given to you. So Dubliners is a series of short stories, but they fit together to complete what we consider to be a novel. So all of the characters, they sort of intersect with each other. Of course, they all live in Dublin, and they all share qualities with each other, and they reappear in each other's stories. So this is modernist, first of all, in that it's not a typical novel that has one definitive plot arc. These stories are more linked thematically and, of course, in their setting. The very first chapters of Dubliners, you guys are going to actually start with the third chapter, Araby, which is one of the chapters that's most often anthologized. It's the one in the senior textbook here at Phillipsburg. But we're going to be reading Araby, and then we'll be reading The Sisters and An Encounter. And all three of those stories center around children who are innocent for sure, not corrupt adults, but they are certainly living in a corrupt world, and they butt up against the more frightening corrupt adult society. Okay, after that, you guys will be reading 2 Gallants, okay, which is a story about young adults. Oh, I'm sorry. We're also going to read a story called Eveline, which is another story about young adults. So it's basically, these people who are on the precipice of adulthood, but not quite exiting from childhood. The third section of Dubliners features older married adults. So we'll cover the boarding house and counterparts. Okay, and then we will cover older single adults with Clay. And then Joyce goes to the public arena, and that is features a story called Ivy Day in the Committee Room, which is about politics in Ireland, A Mother, which is about the arts in Ireland, and Grace, which is about religion. Okay, so these are the stories I have listed here are the ones that I most often teach. So, but since this is a different situation, we may skip around a little bit and we may read more than is here. The finale of Dubliners is also a story that's most anthologized, and it's called The Dead. That is actually considered to be on its own a novella. It was also a Broadway musical. It's been a movie. It's been many things. So The Dead is the story that sort of sums up all of the themes of the novel Dubliners and brings it to a close. Okay, so ordinarily I would paint this on the board, but I'm going to show you guys what a nomen is at the very on the next slide. So this is a word that usually we don't hear very often, even in geometry class. It's Euclidean geometry, so a lot of times students haven't heard of it. It's this shape, though. Okay, so it is this parallelogram with another parallelogram inside it. And then if you were to take out the center parallelogram, so then you'd be left with this lopsided L shaped if you were to take out the dotted line here. Okay, so that is a nomen. It's essentially a shape with an obvious missing chunk out of it. So in the very beginning of Dubliners, in the short story The Sisters, our young narrator is muttering to himself words that are just kind of floating through his mind. And one word that floats through his mind, that's probably from his math class that day, is the word nomen. This shape is really the structure of every short story in Dubliners, meaning that the most important piece of Dubliners is, of every story in Dubliners, it is missing. And it's up to you to figure out what that piece is. Okay. Symbols to look for: images of the Catholic Church, a confessional, communion, circles, an angel, hell and heaven, Irish reels. We'll talk about that, what that musical piece is. Rounds, as in drinking in a bar. Harp, a harp is a symbol of Ireland. The cover of the Irish flag. And an epiphany, which is a sudden realization made possible through God. That's in the religious sense. Okay, but come back to that. I'm sorry. An epiphany can also just be a sudden realization. And in every chapter of Dubliners, a character has some kind of epiphany or realization about themselves. Okay, your term here, microcosm, that means a small version of the world at large, representative of people everywhere. For James Joyce, Dublin is a microcosm for people everywhere. Okay. All right, so that's the background, and now we're going to continue with Araby.